and good evening. Welcome to our April edition of exaflicks. So this is something that we've been doing every month, sort of since the first lockdown. We come together, a few friends, we talk about a particular film or some films. We talk about the merits, the bits that could have been better, and whether we might, because some of us are teachers, whether we might use them with classes. And this is the first one where we're doing a smaller, cozier version of exaflicks. And tonight I've invited my friends Martin and Penny to join us. And I don't know if you saw that when this was advertised, we've told you we've watched 3 films, and all of these 3 films link to Silicon Valley. Martin and I recently been talking a lot about Silicon Valley because did you know, Penny, that Martin's taken children from his school to Silicon Valley in the next year or so? You know that, okay. And last week we talked to some other teachers who've been or were thinking of taking. So Silicon Valley has been playing very much on our mind, or at least mine. And I've been reading a lot about it. And there's some amazing stories about things that happened in this very, like, compared to other parts of the world, it's a very highly condensed, there's a lot of activity. And there's actually quite a few films, and we've chosen 3 of them tonight. So what I'm going to ask is if we start with Penny, and then we move on to Martin. So I would say, Penny, maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and where, and then we'll move on to your choice of film and we'll see how we go with that. Can I just, sorry, before you do, if there's anybody watching this live and you have access to a keyboard and you've anything you want to ask or say or comment, we'll try to include that. So please do. Okay, Penny.
Okay, so I'm Penny Cater and I am Head of Computing at the Boswell School in Essex. And I'm really keen on trying to apply some knowledge and get kids to think about technology, where it's going, the future of it, and artificial intelligence. Some of the big companies, obviously, and they're quite key, as you've mentioned, in Silicon Valley. So I thought the film that I chose was quite apt because it does remind me a bit of potential how Google is portrayed. Everybody wants to work for Google because it's a fantastic, forward-thinking tech company, can make a lot of money. So the film that I chose was The Circle, starring Tom Hanks. And I can't remember the other lady's name, but basically Emma Watson, there you go. So overall it intrigued me because I think there's quite a lot of morals and ethical considerations that come up. She wants a job there. She has a friend and she managed to get her an interview. As we all know, that's one of the ways in that you can get by Google. So it does remind me a lot of that sort of scenario that everybody wants to work there, etc., etc. So she gets the job, and then she's given targets to meet, and as we all like targets, we like to meet them, and then we increase our targets, etc., etc. It's very clever the way that they actually set the targets and they drive her towards producing, better results, etc., etc. She then rises up through the ranks, does very well, and she decides to. I think she goes kayaking. She has a bit of an accident, and she's caught on film kayaking. And she nearly drowns, but because she has been caught on film, she's able to be rescued, etc., etc. So they then talk about the fact of part of the company. They like their employees to go. I can't remember what the terminology is. To sort of expose her personal freedom, so that she's filmed all the time and everything. So she agrees to do this, and there's some interesting points. So it's really, it reminds me a lot of when CCTV first came out, and it was put up in the streets and everybody was against it because Big Brother was watching you. And now, obviously, the tables turned and they want people to watch them all the time. And there's quite a lot of relations with some of the TV programs. I don't watch them, but there's quite a lot of TV programs that are, Gogglebox, where you watch people watching telly, things like that. And
there's one other at the moment, which is also called The Circle, but no connection to this
Oh, that's
film,
right.
The Circle. Yeah.
So yeah, so she goes on that sort of journey, and then she does really well, and she moves up the ranks more, and she becomes more important, etc., etc. And then there comes a time where she is launching a new product, and part of it is how quick can they find people. And one of the first person that they try and find is a convict, and I think they set themselves a goal of about 30 minutes. So in America, can they find this person in 30 minutes? And so they managed to do that. And then the next person they tried to find is actually a friend of hers. And that's where it starts to get a lot about morals and ethics. She doesn't want to find this person. The audience do. So she has a lot of peer pressure. They then decide that actually, yes, they're going to find that person. And then what happens is people go into a bit of a frenzy about it. And they put drones out, and they put cameras, and they hack into different systems. So there's quite a lot of interesting points. They find this person, and there's a bit of a road chase, and he unfortunately has an accident and dies. And I think that really is a poignant bit for her, for the actress, because it's all about, does she, was it right? She didn't feel it was right, but she felt that she had to go along with it. And I think there's a lot of peer pressure. And although that's quite an extreme measure, I think there's quite a lot of that goes on within society that, we're unaware of, especially outside of school. People are on lots of social media, especially now because we've been in lockdown. People communicate more via technology. So I think there's a lot more pressure on students. So I think there's quite a poignant point.
Did you feel that the film tells multiple stories? Like we've had this when we've talked about some of the other films. This like The Imitation Game. So much is crammed into the 2 hours or so, and even just that very first half hour, where she's recruited to go and work at the Circle, and she's being interviewed for the Circle, and there's the bit where Tom Hanks, and he could be Mark Zuckerberg, he could be Steve Jobs, he could be Sergey or any of these, which I think is very, very clever, because they don't say, oh, it is Google or it is Apple. And he gives a presentation. The audience are all like, whoa, this is brilliant. We love our founder and everything that comes, and I think
very
even
Google,
just,
very Apple-like, isn't it? Sorry.
it is. Well, but
and they make it very inclusive with like the benefits, don't they?
That's right.
Work for us because.
And I think even if you just focused on, say, that first half hour of that film, you could come away from that thinking, wow, this is brilliant. Like, it's a Dragon's Den thing. When can we buy these? When will this little camera be available to all of us? And I think that happens. I think there's a very strong moral there, isn't there, with a lot of technology. Look at this. You can put this in, and, so Google Maps, for example, you can go back and you can see where you were 3 years ago. When somebody says, oh, were you in so-and-so? You just look, oh, no. But somebody else can access that data, and it doesn't make it very clear early on that, the flip side, what are the dangers?
Yeah, so you're kind of rushing into the tech, and you get drawn into that, don't you? And I think it definitely does show that side of it initially.
Yeah, it's sort of easy, isn't it? It shows how people can really be drawn in by, or you get a free phone, and then you get a free this, and then you get a free that, and you just have to do this, and you just have to do that. And it's not until those things build up that you start actually questioning, do I want to? And by then you're actually, too involved and too maybe far down the line. So,
but then, I mean, you've always got that kind of positive and negative to everything with all these ethics, haven't you? And there's that bit where I think she ingests something, sensors, doesn't she, to have all these medical records that she can then keep track of. And then you kind of think, well, actually, that could be a really big benefit. But then, as Alan, you're saying, you've then got that on the other side. Who's got hold of that data? Who's got control of that data? And do you want to relinquish control of that data for that benefit?
Selling it to? Who are they selling it to? And how much money they're making from you? We are huge, have a huge value as a human being, and our data that is stored on us is incredible. And I think the companies are really, you know, I think morally and ethically, I don't think they're doing a very good job. You know, you talk to a lot of the students about, you know, whoever reads the terms and conditions when you're downloading an app. You know, there is no
No.
and there could be anything. They could be selling your soul,
Yeah.
couldn't they? And you wouldn't know.
Even the ones where you have to physically scroll to the bottom, you still don't read them, do you?
I find it's a very watchable film. Like if you read reviews, it never gets 5 stars or 10 out of 10. But I find it's a very easy watch, particularly that first half hour. You feel like you're like, and they take her around the campus, which is like, whether it's Facebook, Apple, that's what they call them, the Googleplex.
Yeah.
And there's all these picnic areas, and everybody all sat outside working in the California air, and they all have as much free food and coffee. And she's like, wow, this is just like paradise. And it's only much later on in the film when it's like she starts to lift up the rocks and see the darker elements underneath. So I think it's a very, very clever film.
I think it's quite interesting when her friend, you know, starts to sort of show those signs of she's very stressed and she's being given targets that are unreachable, and that she actually is starting to question the ethics of the company.
And there's that other really good question, isn't it, that raises this: just because we can doesn't mean that we should. So like at the time we're recording this, there's campaigns all the time, personally saying, get the vaccine, everybody should get the vaccine. But there are people who are choosing not to, and I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. But as you mentioned with the example in the film, technology enables people to track people down and find them. But what if they don't want to be found? You know, can we force people to have the vaccine? You know, is there a point where we're going to pin people down that are vaccine refusers and somebody's going to inject it into them? And then, you know, so this, and I think in a very fairy tale like way, this film introduces those moral debates. And I think there's lots of opportunities where you could just, if you had a class, pause, say, now, what should she do next? What could she do next? And what would the implications be?
Yeah. One of my favorite parts, and I think would be really good for that, is where she comes up with the idea about everyone being required to join, which kind of goes on with that. And it kind of stems from talking about voting and how everyone should be voting. And obviously there are some countries, I think Australia is one, where everyone has to vote. It doesn't matter how you vote, but it's a legal requirement to. And then that kind of brings on a whole other side of it, is like, if you're being told you have to vote, is that then your free will, if you like? And then what benefits and what moral decisions are there around there as well? And I think that is, I think, a really good area to then focus on with the kids, as you're kind of trying to teach them about various laws that come in and how some countries will have different laws to others.
And I think also, you know, these days it's quite easy for kids to get involved in the, you know, what's going on. Is it real? You know, is the news leading you to a certain avenue of thinking, rather than actually going away, doing your own research and then making your own decision? And I think that the film sort of really draws you into the fact that you can just go along, a bit like the Pied Piper. You go and follow.
That's right.
And you don't question.
I think as well, one of the things, I think it's a powerful film. It's a very good film to use particularly with children in classes. It's not so old that the technology, the one that they show at the beginning, this eye thing that I can plant one here and I can put one there. I can imagine children in a year or two saying, "What, do these not exist already?" You know, it's not such a, like watching War of the Worlds, that aliens are going to come and start walking all over the planet. You can imagine within a year or two, and it's true. I don't know if you've watched the film Eye in the Sky, where they use drones for surveillance in the film. And there's one particular drone that they use that hasn't yet been invented, but may exist in a lab somewhere, you know, as far as we know. Really, I think it's a really, really good choice. Have you ever shown any of the film, Penny, with your class? Have you ever suggested that they might go and watch it?
Yeah, I have suggested that they watch that, especially when we do the morals and ethics part of computer science, because I think it draws out a lot. I think that, you know, there are such a great range of films, but I think because I try and associate this with sort of, if you were going to go and work for Google, if you were going to go and work for Apple, if you're going to go and work for Microsoft, you know, think about it along those sort of lines. I picked out a couple of points, obviously at the beginning, to show what it's like working for a company, and you can get drawn into all of that sort of thing. And then the poignant bit where her the peer pressure when they choose her friend, and obviously then what happens with that, and the consequences. So, and I think there's a couple of points where she's very good as an actress. She actually stops where Tom Hanks is sort of pushing her, and you can just, she's not saying anything, but you can see her brain going, actually, yeah, I'm not sure I want to be doing this.
So it's a certificate 12, and I think we all watched it via Netflix, this particular one. So one of the things I'd be a little bit cautious about saying to a class is, right, for homework you all have to go and watch this film, because that causes issues if say, oh, we don't have Netflix at home. So it is nicer sometimes when we choose titles that are going to, like Hidden Figures, that are repeated on TV from time to time. So maybe, I don't know, in a year or two, The Circle may appear on mainstream sort of TV schedules. I don't know if it's available as a DVD. I think the film.
No, I think it's a Netflix special. I think
it was commissioned by Netflix.
I think there's some snippets, aren't there, on YouTube?
That's
some
right.
Snippet videos. So.
And I think as well, I don't know if you've noticed with some of the more modern films that we've selected, there's often 5 or 6 trailers that show things from a different angle. And trailers are a useful thing to have to use in the classroom, obviously, because if they've seen it or not seen it, you can use them very quickly and succinctly to illustrate a point. Okay, any final points about that, or we move on to Martin's choice next?
No, I just give it a go and have an open mind, and then see how you can, you know, see some of the, try and think of some of the, take a step back, think of some of the relationships between modern day and the way we're living life and where technology is going, and just have a think.
I think the film lends itself very well, as you've just illustrated, to, you know, this PRIM methodology, this sort of predict, run in. So it's for people who don't know, it's a particular strategy suggested for teaching programming. But I think the predict, run, investigates that would work quite well. So it's sort of, we watch the first 20 minutes, we see her go and get her job there. She's loving it. She's living her best life. We pause. We'll come back next week. What might happen next? Because this film's going to run, oh, she could invent so-and-so. What are the darker things that might happen? Try to get the classes to imagine, oh, I've seen it. Well, maybe you don't even remember what happens next, you know. So I think it's a good one for that. Thank you, Penny. So now we're going to go to Martin, our second guest. So Martin, if you could, like Penny did, just tell us a little about who you are, and then your film choice and why you chose that particular one.
Yes, so I'm Martin. I am the faculty lead for Business, Health and Computing at Mildenhall College Academy. A lot of different subjects there. My main focus is the computing side of things, though. So I was watching Social Network. So it's a story loosely based, and I do say that very tentatively, because it is very loosely based around the life of Mark Zuckerberg as he came up with the idea of Facebook. He has gone on record to say that a lot of what is on in the film is completely inaccurate. Although one of the things that kind of stood out for me when I was doing a little bit of research around it is that one of the things that they did get spot on was his choice of clothing, and that everything that he wears in the film, he actually owns that sweater or that pair of trousers or that sort of thing, which he says he found funny that was one of the areas they focused on getting absolutely right. But it kind of goes through the story of how he came up with the idea for Facebook while he was at Harvard, starting out on a journey with his friends at the time, and then coming up against various challenges as he kind of developed the idea through kind of the journey up to, I think it finishes at around about 1 million users at the time. And there's lawsuits and things that are going along, and it's very much a story that there's lots of stories going on at the same time. You kind of start right at the beginning of kind of Facebook, but then you jump to kind of the present at the time, which I think was around 2010, something along those lines. And so you kind of go backwards and forwards, and you can kind of see different stories, and he's got 2 different lawsuits on at the same time that he's trying to fight up against, and one was an ex-friend, and another was against 2 brothers who he supposedly stole the idea from. And so there's lots going on. I think in terms of students, especially for computer science, you've got that legislation that you can talk about. Obviously, it is focused more on the American legislation, but we do have kind of very similar legislation in that respect that you can kind of bring into it and talk about. And this was actually a film that got me started on my list of films that I started to do. It was a student last year just said to me, had I seen it? And we were talking about legislation at the time, and she's like, oh, okay, so that's what that's all on about. And so we had a bit of discussion in class, and so I started to put together a list on different films, and like I said, this was the first part that we then started to look at, and it is one of my favorite kind of films, not because of the accuracy, because I think there's very little about it that's actually true. There's things like they try and make it look like it's just all partying and that sort of thing, whereas in actual fact they probably spent a lot more time coding than you kind of see in the film. One of the things is that they kind of go down that route of that the guys are only programming because they think it's going to get them the girls, or to get revenge over girls and that sort of thing. But a lot of the time, and what Mark has said since, is that actually we built because it was fun. Like the whole purpose of us building these platforms is because we enjoyed doing it. And I think that's a message that I really want to get to my students, that it's not necessarily about becoming the next Mark Zuckerberg or the next Bill Gates or whoever they want to be. It's start enjoying it, and hopefully you'll create something later on. But I think it's that build things because you can, because you don't need to go out and buy lots of things to put them together. If you've got a computer, you can start to test things out. If you haven't got a computer, you can write some code, and maybe one day when you do get hold of a computer, you can then test it on it. Obviously, kind of links with previous kind of ways of coding, like the rocket launches and those sorts of things. They did a lot of that by hand before they then started to actually put it on the computers, because they didn't have loads of computers to be able to test. So I think it's just trying to get that idea across, that actually it should just be fun. You should want to code because you enjoy it.
I think that's, I don't want to interrupt too much, but I think
please do.
Sorry, that is a really good point, because a lot of my students, we talk a lot about having a portfolio of evidence. It's not the fact that not everybody wants to go on and do to university, and to actually start working on, if you're working on something that you're enjoying, use that as evidence. If you want to go to a job, take a portfolio with you of all the things that you've created, because you never know what one thing might just get you that job. And that has worked for some of my students in the past, certainly with getting apprenticeships, going on to get jobs. They've shown them the projects that they've created, things that they've done at home, just because they've enjoyed it, teaching themselves different languages. So I think that's a really good point, actually.
Yeah, no, it is. I think it's one of those things that too often, especially as a teacher, you are kind of drawn towards, right, we've got to get results for the students, and it's such a results business. But actually, kids need to enjoy coding. They're not going to do well with it because we're telling them you've got to do well. They'll only succeed if they've got those projects on the side that they've been working on, that they do coding outside of the lessons, not because I've set them some homework, but because they want to. And I think, like I say, I mean, we've had a number of students where they would just do their own things. We had one of my students in the past sat down and decided, right, I'm going to try and make my own operating system. He didn't get very far with it because it's quite complex, but he was doing it because he enjoyed it, and he managed to get certain aspects of it working, and that sort of thing. So I think that's one of the things that I think needs to come out from it, and I don't think the film does do that justice. So I would always say, on the side of things, bringing up kind of what Mark has highlighted outside of the film as actually we did things because we enjoyed it. In terms of within the film, though, there were a few of my favourite parts. I like the fact that that Mark talked through how he was hacking into the servers using kind of various languages and that sort of thing, kind of highlighting that there are different languages and different techniques that you use. Obviously, not so good that he was doing it to hack into a system, and obviously we can't ever condone that sort of thing. But I like the fact that he was kind of talking through how he was doing it. I like the fact they did just show that actually all you need is this computer in your room and you can develop whatever you want. Some of the things he was developing, a little bit dubious, but he was creating things just because he could and just because he wanted to.
I think that's a really good point as well, because that's what a lot of kids are doing. They are experimenting, aren't they? And they're not quite sure what they're doing. And I think that's a really key point to pick up on.
So I've tried to remain positive about this, and I'm just really struggle. I remember when the film first came out, a colleague of mine said, "Oh, well, you're gonna have to watch it. You're gonna have to watch it," like 2011 or something like that. And I struggled to finish the film. All I wanted to do was shout things and throw things at it when I was watching it a few years ago. And then it was just recently when Martin mentioned it, and I thought, oh, maybe I need to go back and watch it. And you sold it to me. You were saying, oh, it shows how it goes from bedroom to boardroom, and and does all this amazing stuff. So I went back to it. I thought with an open mind. I just find it really, really difficult to watch. Not to say that the film isn't entertaining or anything. In fact, I mean, when we say this, all of these films are designed initially to entertain. They're not meant as historical, accurate documents of what happened. So there's going to be an element of, well, we don't know if he said this. Well, what if he had said this, and how might the film be? So if it's like maybe it took him 200 hours of coding to actually build Facebook, well, that wouldn't have made for very entertaining watching. 3 Netflix box sets or something watching. No. So it does include the more salacious, the more risky elements. And while you're saying he disputes some of the, and I think I might have even read the same thing where Zuckerberg disputes. He disputes the things that portray him negatively. He doesn't dispute the things that put him in a positive light. And I think, oh, come on, So he's like, oh yeah, they got all my clothes down to a T, but that bit about me being a jerk, that bit about me trying to get revenge on my girlfriend, no. I can't.
Yeah.
Oh,
I want to believe that the version I've seen in the film is true. And we know the facts say that, all of these friends, all these people said, oh, this is a great idea. Let's invest some money in it. At some point or other, they're going to be on the other side of a table suing him to say, well, we entered into this gentleman's agreement, or we said we're going to do this, and you've turned your back on us. And he is the one who is synonymous with Facebook. We can barely remember the names of the others.
I think that's really key, actually, Alan, and I think you make a really good point, because when you take a step back and you look at it overall, actually, they started off as a good group of friends, and they were helping each other out, because that's what you do with coding. You talk to somebody, you get a bit of code from here and there and everywhere, and then it just demonstrated that actually, there is a turning point, and if you don't have some sort of agreement, it gets nasty, and it tends to, the sort of like dog eat dog type of thing. And I think that is portrayed really well in that film. And I think
to me, he comes across as the smiling assassin. Yeah, sure, I'm building this network. It's all for my friends. But the minute I don't like you, I'm going to stab you in the back. Like when you mentioned this about parties and stuff, he doesn't do that much partying. In fact, in the film, the way it tells the story is this party going on, and it's busted by the police. And where is Mark Zuckerberg? He's at the office. Well, how did the police know we were having this party? Did Zuckerberg rat on us to the police? Because the people, what's his name? The Napster, Sean. What's
Sean
his
Parker.
name? But he thinks he's getting in a bit too close. He gets caught carrying drugs at the party. Or something.
Although that part apparently is actually factually inaccurate, because the drugs bit was that I think he did get charged, but it was a different state and a different time. So I think that part definitely is fabricated in terms of that part. I think with all these films though, they do kind of have the kind of the tech person as this kind of ruthless person. And I think you've kind of got to draw from that actually, if you are going to be successful, you do have to have that ruthlessness to you, and you've got to sometimes make the decisions that you believe are for the good of your company.
I disagree completely with that. I mean, was Facebook entirely his idea? It was a mental process, wasn't it?
Yeah.
All the people. So actually, he was very ruthless, and he drove over people to get to where he wanted to get to. And I think that's just not a good, it happens, and we know it happens, but I just think it's almost portraying technology in a wrong way. It's a bit like all of the others that all the other films where technology is driven for money. And yes, it is, but actually we do have that responsibility. If we are, and cybersecurity and things like that, if we have all this data, we have a responsibility to make sure it is secure and we are using it for the correct purposes. Whereas he was very ruthless. He was just like, I don't like this, I don't like that, I'm not going to do this, not going to do that.
And the whole irony is, it's all about friends. It's about growing your community and stuff. And he doesn't seem to have many friends left from when he was at uni, and he thinks of this tool. And there was something that Penny said earlier on. It kind of reminds me of this: children playing with fire. Let's put some petrol. Whoa! And I think it got to a point he didn't actually know the power, or when he saw it, he fell in love with the power of what it could do. And the story that's undisputed is that he was jilted by a girlfriend, or fell out with a girlfriend, and he got bored and decided to create this girlfriend rating index, or how pretty, or how much is this woman dating. That's not how you go and win friends. Let's put all these girls, let's vote down the ugliest one and vote up the prettiest one. And I don't mean you, Martin, you strike me as a very, very nice person. I just thought it was an unusual film to choose, unless of course you do want to say, look, if you want to be a billionaire, you're going to have to step on everybody you can, in fact trample on them to get to where
I think it's more that there's just lots of different aspects to talk about, because you've got those things that you can debate, and they leads to kind of classroom discussions in there. There was one quote in there that was from Erica, the girlfriend at the time, where she says that the internet's not written in pencil, it's written in pen. And I think that bit about it's got those messages in there that you kind of keep coming back to, that actually if you do like stamp on these people, there's going to be kind of repercussions, lawsuits and those sorts of things. That girlfriend that you had is not going to talk to you again, and you're going to end up losing your friends. So I think one of the strap lines for the film was, you don't get 500 million friends without making some enemies on the way. And I think that kind of goes through and kind of it's really clear from that. And there's someone actually wrote an article about this film a couple of years ago, so kind of 9 years after the release date, and kind of looked at it from kind of what's been going on with Facebook and social media, and said actually everything is still really relevant, nothing's changed. That power that you get from the social networks, actually there's a lot of bad that is still being done from it, and I think you've got that you can talk about.
The other Oh, go on, Penny.
I was just going to pick up on the, I don't know if that bit is actually true, but I like the bit about the student handbook. And I don't know if that scene is correct or not, where they try and challenge based on the student handbook that you're not allowed to steal ideas, that type of thing. And I think that was quite poignant for me, because actually the brothers, they did have that idea, and he sort of, the ideas developed, and they found a way of trying to get, almost get the power back, or the product back to what they wanted. And is it the dean? He just wasn't having any of it.
There's like a code of ethics or code of conduct. If you're a member of this house, then you shouldn't do this. And the dean was like, go away, I'm not interested.
And then you have codes of conduct at work, and you have codes of conduct at school, and what's the implications for those?
I've put a link into the YouTube chat to a trailer, which I've only actually watched this trailer this evening before coming along, and my gosh, it's not a very doesn't put him in a very good light. They've taken like what you could say is the worst elements of the film and put it in the trailer. I'll share it with you if you haven't seen it. So that we've been talking so far about, Penny talked about The Circle, which is the 2017 film from Netflix. Yeah. We've just been talking about The Social Network, and apologies, Martin, we can go in when social distance rules away, we can have a hug or something afterwards. It is a great film to show certain things, but I cannot say that what he's done is great. That's the issue I take it, or the way he went about it. He could have gone about his other ways. Would it have been as successful? The other thing that's interesting is that film was released in 2010. Facebook, that's 11 years ago, and so much more has happened since. So it'd be interested to see what's version 2.
Apparently there is talk of a sequel, which would be interesting to see what they cram into there.
Well, and see, GCHQ now define Facebook as the dark web, so that's quite interesting.
Just like a small side note as well, I created a virtual tour inside Facebook last week, and there's these words that keep playing. Mark Zuckerberg is showing us around the office, and he keeps saying we operate in an environment of transparency. We want everyone to know and see what we're doing. And I was like, yeah. and it's the same kind of PR marketing message in The Circle. And I think that is a nice segue into my choice of film, which we're going to move on to now. So I have selected, it took me a long time to get to one, Jobs, which is the 2013 film, not to be confused with a similar named film, which is Steve Jobs of 2015. So the way not to get confused is to remember that the one I'm going to be talking about is the one with Ashton Kutcher in. I did actually watch the other one first, but I'm not going to mention that one so much now. So this film, why have I chosen this? Well, there's a word that I'm trying not to use tonight. It's a word you might use to describe a person who's not very nice, and it has 2 syllables, and the first syllable might rhyme with the word glass, and the second syllable might rhyme with the word pole. And I think, that for me, sorry, in my opinion, it's one thing that links all of these films together, that there is one of these characters in the film, and Steve Jobs is portrayed in this film as a little bit of one of those himself. But I feel that this film, a little bit like the other two, again, it's 3 or 4 stories all combined into one. And I really love the first half hour. I want to keep watching the first half hour over and over again. And it's all this sort of idyllic tale. Steve Jobs goes to college, high school, doesn't quite like it, doesn't like shoes, doesn't like studying, doesn't like having to do things he doesn't have to do. But, it's the 70s, and it's free this and free that, and then goes off to India for a while, studies calligraphy and art and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I can relate to that. I'm not going to India, of course, but and then he ends up, he comes back and he's going to have to do something. He gets this job working at Atari. Now, Atari at one point were seen as they were the Facebook, Apple, Google or whatever of Silicon Valley. And he's working there for a while, and he's very, very clever and manipulative. And he manages to get people to do things for him where he always ends up profiting. So there's one bit where one of the employees, his director or something at Atari, says to him, "If you can do this for me, I'll pay you $4,000. And then he trundles along to his mate, Steve Wozniak, and he says, "If you can do this for me, I'll pay you $350, you know." And you think, this is his friend. It kind of brings him back to the Facebook one a little bit. And I just love those scenes. They go to this homebrew computing club. I've been to some clubs like that myself, not in the 70s, but a few years later. And I felt it portrays those bits very, very well. And there's a bit where Steve Jobs goes to this guy who runs a shop called a Byte Shop. And this guy showed it like a vague interest in these Apple computers. And Steve Jobs goes in and says, "Right, pay us up front." And he goes, "No way, no, I'll pay you $400. He says, "No, on delivery. Pay us $500 on delivery, and you've got a deal." And it is kind of likable in a way that he's such the salesman. He goes in and he's always trying to make things far better for him than they might have otherwise been. And there's a bit later on where they go back to this shop, and at this point they've assembled them all, and the guy's like, "What? This is just a circuit board." And it reminded me of another computer that came out a few years ago from Cambridge. "It's just a circuit board. What is?" "I know, but..." And Steve Jobs is like, "Oh yeah, but it's a marketing opportunity because you can sell them keyboards and screens, and that's what you are. You're a shop. You can sell, you know." So I thought those bits were done very, very nicely. And there's another bit. Sorry, going blah 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 on. It's very, very accurate. I've done freeze frames and I've looked at some of the posters and stuff, and they're all very, very historically accurate. Even there's a scene, all the scenes that they film at Steve Jobs' childhood home, they actually filmed it at his home. And you can go online and you can see where people have turned up the same days, and the film crew are getting the house ready to look like it was back then. And that's so, I really enjoyed that element. And then after that, it's like watching The Social Network. He works for Apple. He doesn't work for Apple. He wants to push this. Nobody else wants to. And it's just, you start to lose the thread a little bit after. Because
did you know? Sorry.
Yeah, go on. I've done enough.
I was just going to say, you know, what I found from watching that, apart from it's 2 hours I'm not going to get my life back, is, you know, it was the team that made him, and he drove his team, but I don't think in a very good way. You know, he drove them to succeed, but by manipulation and almost by fear. So I think that's what really came across to me. I don't know how you felt about it, Martin, but
yeah, I think from me, he apparently he was not a very good programmer. He was not a very good engineer. So all he really brought to the table was the marketing side of things. Like Alan was saying, he was very good at selling things. And I think that's where it's a little bit different to the social network side of things, because Mark was the coder, so the driving force behind it. He may have needed some other people to give him a few ideas and pointers along the way. Whereas obviously Steve Jobs is portrayed as the person that he's got all these ideas. He knows what he wants the finished product to look like, and it must look like this. It must do this. And if you don't manage to do it in this way, then you're off the team and you're not going to be. So he was, again, a very ruthless person within it. And I think you're right. I don't think he was a very good manager type of person.
Why do you think he's held in such high regard then, Steve Jobs? Because really all he did was the iPod, the i thing, wasn't it? The coloured.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even him, was it? It was his team.
I think it's because he's the one that's on the stage, isn't it? It's his idea, and he was very good. I think that's where earlier on when I was talking to you about the circle, and how Hanks was very much a Steve Jobs character there, that he'd take the stage, and he was a very charismatic person. I think in public life, I think you could, regardless of what was going on behind the scenes, he was very good at making something seem a lot better than it was. And I think Alan was saying with when he went into Bytes, oh, you've just got a circuit board. Well, no, now you can sell all of your keyboards and all of your monitors and all of your other things to go alongside it, and then you're going to make even more money from this idea that we've come up with, where in reality it was kind of his friends doing the majority of the hard work.
Again, it does not come across as a very nice person to have known, or there's not so much in this film, but in one of the other films, the relationship with his daughter, who for many years said wasn't his daughter, wasn't anything to do with her, said lots of unkind things about her mother, and these kind of things. And then we see scenes in this film with his team, and he's like, "Come on, team, we're gonna," and then somebody goes, "Whoa, hang on, we can't do that. Why are you still here?" No, because I'm saying, no, get out, and I will admit, I've worked in schools where we've had team leaders who've been like that, and do I put my hand up and say, or do I from now, forever now, regret this? And there are people in life who will drive everybody to the edge to deliver this thing, this vision. And, I think why I liked the first part of the film, because it portrays Steve Wozniak as the anti-hero. And I think that's why I found this film that much more enjoyable, because like in interviews, which is not in the film, later on, he says, well, yeah, I mean, Steve said he was my friend, and I didn't know that Atari actually paid him $5,000, and I only got $350, and maybe that wasn't right. But you know what? I had such a great time. I loved building those things, and I just did it for the love of and I feel like Jobs took advantage of people to be successful.
There was quite a good part, I thought, and I can't remember exactly. Was it the Macintosh where it didn't, where it just went downhill? Was it the Macintosh?
Yeah.
And it took 2 years or something to develop.
Exactly. Yes.
And I thought that was quite a poignant bit that actually showed a lot of flaws and a lot of faults in Jobs, where they portray him as being quite driven and he drives his team and that, but he really lost it a bit there, didn't he? That was really his sort of downfall.
The film starts, the very first 2 minutes or so, it's a product launch of the iPod from 2001, and it says 2001. You think that's 20 years ago the iPod came out. And all of those, he would spend hours rehearsing those and the actual format very rarely differed. It was nearly always the same thing. So people were like, oh, he's going to pull this thing out, and then he's going to flick a button, and then he's going to go, haha, we have some. And he very rarely deviated. And I think people just thought, oh, brilliant, here we are, we're in for another show.
Yeah. And we're going to find out something extra at the end as well.
Yeah,
and I think
we never knew we needed.
Yeah, and I think he just draws you in, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I think from my point of view, there's a lot less in this film to be able to really talk to the kids about.
Absolutely.
I think this is more of kind of the history of a particular thing. I think obviously you can talk about the bits of hardware and that sort of thing within it, but I don't think you'd get as much discussion going with the kids. I think, like you said, there are people where unfortunately you will probably have to work for someone like a Steve Jobs type character as your manager at some point, and so it's a bit of an eye-opener for some of the kids of what it might be like, but I don't think there's much that I would teach that to the students from this film.
I think for me, sorry,
go on.
There's sort of two things I would pick out from the film. One is what you said, Alan, is the circuit boards, them actually soldering the bits together and putting it all together. I think that is quite poignant because kids don't, everything's hidden from them. unless you've got your Raspberry Pi, everything is just, you don't see it, you don't know what it does.
That was very much an Apple thing, though, wasn't it? And I don't know if it's in this one they focus on, or whether it's the Steve Jobs one, but he's so adamant of having everything. You're not allowed to touch it. And I think when the compromise with the iMac that they brought, it was see-through, so you could see it, but you still can't get to it.
Yeah, and I think that, Apple and some of the companies have a responsibility or a part to play in the fact that, that's why kids don't know what's going on inside the computer, and shouldn't they really know, because it is a huge part of their life. They're using a computer device which is their phone. It's not a phone, is it, as we know anymore? So shouldn't they be aware of what actually is going on within it? And I think
actually, it also leads to the environmental issues that you could bring up from it, couldn't you? The fact that actually you're having to replace the whole thing, when in reality, maybe you only need to replace the battery or the CPU or whatever it might be. You can't really do that kind of fixing job that you used to be able to do. And it's a little bit like that with kind of cars and anything modern really these days, isn't it? Like in the past, you would have fixed it yourself or found someone that just could put in that part.
And I think that's quite key, actually, because they're talking a lot at the moment about the amount of wastage that electronics are producing. And I think that, the second thing I was going to say is that, Apple and the other companies, they do have responsibility, especially Apple. They have made themselves quite elitist, I think. And I have nothing against people want to do Apple, it's not a problem. But a computer basically does the same thing. It just has a label, and it's whether you want that label or not. And Apple have portrayed, and I think that's what I got from that film, is that it is quite it's a social status to have that product.
People have said, oh, Alan, no, you're misjudging him. I mean, he was such an innovator, and he drove forward so many original ideas. But actually, when you go away and read, like, computers with graphic user interfaces, no, that was actually an idea that was being developed at Xerox PARC. And he went over there, and in exchange for giving stock from Apple, they let him take that idea away. And Adele Goldberg, she was like, over my dead body, will you take this idea away from us? And who owns a Xerox computer nowadays? Maybe one that you might see in a museum. And I think, I know, because I've worked with people, it's like, oh, we're going to get the best GCSE grades ever, and we're going to make our children do this, and and you sometimes think, yeah, but how many hours sleep do we have to lose in order to achieve these kind of things? And yes, you can achieve great things when you have a great team and everybody's all moving, but it's all just very finely held together before somebody in your board disagrees or somebody else. And the second part of the film is just like a roller coaster ride of it's going well, it's not going well, it's going well, it's not going well.
I think that's one good thing though to think about, actually, that you're not always going to have a success with your products, and obviously that's a good lesson for the students to learn. Obviously Apple had a really kind of quite a few examples of it. One of them was the Newton that they then reinvented as the iPad. First time round, that like the technology wasn't ready for their idea. The second time around, they managed to get it right, and it's obviously the one of the leading tablets. That it's basically the same device, but it's just got upgraded technology in it, hasn't it?
Right, we'll wrap it up there. The film that we've just been discussing is the 2013 film Jobs with Ashton Kutcher. We started off talking about The Circle, and we also discussed The Social Network. And you've been listening to me, Alan O'Donoghue, Penny Cater, and Martin Sexton. There is a way that you can leave feedback. There's a link that you may have already seen. There's a form. Please go and fill it in. If you've got any suggestions or nominations for films in the future, please let us know. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to